The rain hammered against the windshield of the black Range Rover as it sped through the winding country roads of Windsor. Inside, tears mixed with raindrops on a young girl's face, tears that would soon change everything. What started as a routine security patrol would become the most important moment in Royal Guard Sergeant Michael Harrison's 20-year career. When he pulled over what appeared to be a suspicious vehicle that had been driving erratically through restricted royal grounds, he expected to find perhaps a lost tourist or an overzealous photographer. Instead, he discovered Princess Charlotte, the future of the British monarchy, sobbing uncontrollably in the back seat of a car driven by someone who wasn't supposed to have her at all. This is the true story of how one guard's dedication to duty uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the royal household, and how a little girl's tears revealed a truth that would shake the very foundations of the British royal family. Sergeant Michael Harrison had seen many storms during his 20 years as a royal protection officer, but nothing quite like the one that was brewing on that fateful Tuesday afternoon in October. The weather seemed to mirror the tension that had been building within the royal household over the past few weeks. Dark clouds rolled across the Windsor estate like a warning, and the wind carried with it an unusual sense of urgency that made even the most experienced guards feel uneasy. Harrison stood at his post near the east gate, his trained eyes scanning the grounds with the same methodical precision that had earned him commendations from 3 different monarchs. At 45, he was no longer the young recruit who had once dreamed of adventure and excitement in royal service. Instead, he had become something far more valuable, a man who understood that true protection often came from noticing the smallest details that others might miss. The radio crackled to life on his shoulder, breaking through the sound of wind and rain. "All units, we have reports of unusual activity near the south perimeter. Vehicle spotted moving through restricted areas without proper clearance. All patrols maintain heightened alertness." Harrison adjusted his waterproof jacket and checked his equipment one final time. Something about today felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Perhaps it was the way the staff had been whispering in corners all morning, or how Camilla had seemed unusually agitated during the security briefing earlier. The Duchess of Cornwall, soon-to-be Queen Consort, was typically composed and gracious with the security team, but today she had barely made eye contact with anyone. The radio buzzed again, this time with more urgency. "Unit 7, we need you to investigate a black Range Rover heading north on the estate road. License plate partially obscured, driving pattern inconsistent with standard protocols." Harrison immediately moved toward his patrol vehicle, his boots splashing through puddles that had already formed on the ancient cobblestones. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror, graying temples, lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent watching and waiting, always prepared for the moment when vigilance would truly matter. The engine roared to life, and he pulled out onto the estate road, windshield wipers working frantically against the increasing downpour. Through the sheets of rain, he could just make out taillights in the distance. The vehicle was indeed moving erratically, sometimes slowing to a crawl, then, suddenly, accelerating, as if the driver was either lost or deliberately trying to avoid detection. Harrison's training kicked in automatically. He began to catalog everything he observed: the make and model of the vehicle, the way it hugged the right side of the road, the fact that it hadn't stopped at the required checkpoint near the north gate. Most concerning of all was the route it was taking, which would lead directly through the most sensitive areas of the estate, including the private family quarters. As he followed at a discreet distance, Harrison's mind raced through possibilities. Car theft was virtually unheard of on royal grounds, given the extensive security measures in place. A confused visitor seemed unlikely, as all legitimate guests were escorted by security personnel. That left more troubling possibilities: either someone with authorized access was acting outside their permissions, or somehow an unauthorized person had gained access to both the vehicle and the estate. The Range Rover ahead suddenly swerved slightly, correcting course in a way that suggested the driver was either unfamiliar with the road or distracted by something inside the vehicle. Harrison increased his speed slightly, closing the gap while being careful not to appear threatening. His years of experience had taught him that the first moments of any intercept were crucial. Approach too aggressively, and you might escalate a simple misunderstanding into a dangerous situation. The rain was getting heavier, turning the windshield into a waterfall despite the wipers' best efforts. Harrison had to lean forward, squinting through the downpour, when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the rear window of the Range Rover, he could see what appeared to be a small figure in the back seat, someone who seemed to be moving in an agitated or distressed manner. His radio crackled again. Unit 7, report status. This is Harrison. I have visual contact with the suspect vehicle. Appears to be one adult driver and, at least one passenger, possibly a child, in the rear compartment. Vehicle is approximately 2 kilometers from the main family residence, heading directly toward restricted zones. Understood. Proceed with standard intercept protocol. Additional units are being dispatched to your location. Harrison felt his pulse quicken as he activated his vehicle's emergency lights. The blue and red strobes cut through the gray afternoon, casting eerie shadows across the rain-soaked landscape. He expected the Range Rover to pull over immediately. Anyone with legitimate business on the estate would recognize the authority of Royal Protection vehicles and comply without question. Instead, the vehicle ahead seemed to hesitate, slowing down but not stopping. For several tense seconds, it continued forward at reduced speed, as if the driver was weighing options or perhaps communicating with someone else. Harrison could see the driver's silhouette through the rear window, but the heavy rain and tinted glass made identification impossible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, the Range Rover began to pull toward the side of the road. Harrison positioned his patrol car behind it, maintaining standard safety distances while keeping his emergency lights active. As both vehicles came to a complete stop, he took a deep breath and ran through his mental checklist: identify all occupants, assess potential threats, maintain control of the situation while being prepared for any possibility. What happened next would change not only Harrison's understanding of his role within the royal household but also reveal secrets that had been carefully hidden from public view. As he stepped out of his patrol car into the driving rain, water immediately soaking through his uniform, he had no way of knowing that he was about to uncover a situation that would test every principle of loyalty, duty, and protection that he had sworn to uphold. The figure in the driver's seat remained motionless as Harrison approached, his hand resting casually but deliberately near his radio. Standard protocol required him to identify the driver first, then assess any passengers, but something about the stillness inside the vehicle made him unusually cautious. In his experience, people with nothing to hide typically rolled down their windows immediately and began explaining their presence. The continued silence from the vehicle's occupants was setting off every alarm bell in his experienced mind. Through the rain-streaked windows, he could see that the rear passenger was indeed a child, and something about their posture suggested distress. The small figure appeared to be hunched forward, possibly crying, though the combination of poor visibility and his position outside the vehicle made it impossible to be certain. What he could determine was that this was not the composed, controlled environment that characterized all official royal family transportation. As Harrison reached the driver's side door, he tapped gently on the window with his knuckles, using the standard non-threatening approach that had been drilled into him during countless training sessions. Royal Protection Service, he announced clearly, his voice carrying despite the sound of rain on metal. Please lower your window and provide identification. The window began to descend slowly, revealing first a hand gripping the steering wheel with unusual tension, then an arm, and, finally, a face that Harrison recognized immediately. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but seeing Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, behind the wheel of an unescorted vehicle during a storm was definitely not one of them. Even more surprising was her appearance. The woman who was typically the picture of royal composure looked haggard and stressed. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were unmistakable tracks of tears on her cheeks. But it was her eyes that truly concerned Harrison. They held a look of desperation that he had never seen from any member of the royal family. "Your Grace," Harrison said, automatically adjusting his tone to the respectful formality required when addressing senior royals. "I wasn't aware of any scheduled movements this afternoon. Are you experiencing any difficulties?" Camilla's response was not at all what he expected. Instead of the calm explanation or mild irritation at being stopped that he might have anticipated, she seemed to struggle to find words. "Sergeant Harrison, isn't it?" she finally managed, her voice hoarse as if she had been crying for some time. We were just taking a drive." It was then that Harrison heard it, a sound that cut through the noise of the storm and went straight to his heart. From the back seat came the unmistakable sound of a child sobbing, not the brief tears of a minor upset, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone in genuine distress. Every instinct he had developed as both a protection officer and a father himself told him that something was seriously wrong. Your Grace, with your permission, I'd like to check on your passenger, Harrison said, maintaining his professional tone while his mind raced through protocols and procedures. The weather conditions are quite severe, and I want to ensure everyone's safety and well-being. Camilla's face went through a series of expressions: panic, resignation, and something that might have been relief. Of course, she said quietly, though I should explain. But, before she could finish her sentence, Harrison was already moving toward the rear door of the Range Rover. Through the window, he could see the small passenger more clearly now, and his heart nearly stopped. The child was unmistakably Princess Charlotte, the 7-year-old daughter of Prince William and Catherine, and she was in obvious distress. This was the moment when Sergeant Michael Harrison realized that his routine patrol had just become something unprecedented in his career. As he reached for the door handle, he knew that whatever he discovered in the next few minutes would require him to make decisions that went far beyond standard operating procedures, decisions that might well determine the future safety and well-being of one of the most protected children in the world. The rear door of the Range Rover opened with a soft click, but the sound seemed to echo in Harrison's ears like thunder. Princess Charlotte looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes that were far too old for her 7 years, and, in that moment, every protective instinct he possessed as both a royal guard and a human being kicked into overdrive. "Hello, Princess," Harrison said gently, crouching down to be at her eye level despite the rain soaking through his uniform. His voice carried the same warm tone he used with his own daughter. "I'm Sergeant Harrison. Are you hurt? Are you safe?" Charlotte's response broke his heart. Instead of the polite, well-rehearsed greeting that royal children were taught from an early age, she simply threw herself forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck, sobbing into his shoulder. The force of her distress was so intense that Harrison instinctively wrapped his arms around her, creating a protective shelter against both the storm and whatever had caused her such pain. "I want to go home," Charlotte whispered through her tears, her voice muffled against his jacket. "I want Mommy and Daddy. Please, I just want to go home." Harrison's mind was spinning as he processed the implications of what he was witnessing. Princess Charlotte was supposed to be at Lambrook School, safe in her normal routine. Instead, she was here, in an unscheduled vehicle with Camilla, in obvious emotional distress, during what should have been a normal school day. None of this aligned with any authorized movements or activities that had been communicated through proper channels. "Your Grace," Harrison called over his shoulder to Camilla, who remained in the driver's seat, "I need to understand what's happening here. This situation requires immediate clarification." Camilla finally stepped out of the vehicle, and Harrison could see that she was shaking, whether from cold, stress, or something else entirely. Her usually immaculate appearance was completely disheveled, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. More concerning was the way she kept glancing around nervously, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "Sergeant, you don't understand," Camilla began, her voice barely audible above the storm. "There are things happening within the family, decisions being made. I couldn't let them." She stopped herself, seeming to realize that she was about to reveal information that went far beyond Harrison's security clearance. Charlotte pulled back slightly from Harrison's embrace, wiping her nose on her sleeve in a gesture that was utterly normal for a distressed child but somehow heartbreaking when performed by a future queen. "She came to get me from school," Charlotte said, her voice still shaky with tears. "She said there was an emergency, but then she kept driving and wouldn't take me home. I got scared." Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain running down his neck. An unauthorized removal from school, even by a family member, was a serious security breach that would have triggered multiple protocols and alerts. The fact that no such alerts had been issued suggested either a complete failure of security systems or something far more troubling, that this removal had been deliberately kept secret from the protection services. "Princess Charlotte," Harrison said carefully, "did anyone at school verify with your parents that you were supposed to leave with the Duchess?" Charlotte shook her head, fresh tears starting to flow. "Miss Patterson said she tried to call Mommy, but the Duchess said it was very urgent and they would understand later. But then, we kept driving, and when I asked to call Mommy myself, she said the phones weren't working." Harrison's professional alarm bells were now ringing at maximum volume. He reached for his radio, but Camilla quickly stepped forward, her hand extended in a gesture that was part plea, part command. "Please, Sergeant Harrison, before you call this in, you need to understand what's really happening." Charlotte is in danger, more danger than you can possibly imagine, and not from strangers or terrorists. The threat is much closer to home than anyone realizes." The implications of Camilla's words hit Harrison like a physical blow. In his 20 years of Royal Protection Service, he had been trained to defend against external threats: assassins, kidnappers, terrorists, unstable individuals seeking attention or revenge. But the possibility that a threat might come from within the royal family itself was something that challenged every assumption he had about his role and responsibilities. "Your Grace, I need you to be very specific about what you're telling me," Harrison said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when dealing with potentially criminal matters. "Are you suggesting that someone within the royal household poses a threat to Princess Charlotte's safety?" Camilla looked around nervously again, then leaned closer to Harrison, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "There are plans being made, decisions about Charlotte's future that her parents haven't been fully informed about. Educational arrangements, living situations, even potential marriage contracts being discussed with European royal families. At 7 years old, Sergeant. They're treating her like a political asset rather than a child." Harrison felt his world shift slightly on its axis. While he knew that royal marriages had historically been matters of state rather than personal choice, the idea that such arrangements were being made for a 7-year-old in the modern era seemed impossible to believe. Yet Camilla's distress appeared genuine, and Charlotte's tears were certainly real. "Who is they, Your Grace?" Harrison asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. "Charles," Camilla whispered, the name carrying more weight than should be possible for a single word. "And others in his inner circle. They believe that Charlotte's position as a future queen requires management from an early age. They want to remove her from William and Catherine's direct influence, place her in specialized institutions where every aspect of her education and development can be controlled." The picture Camilla was painting was disturbing on multiple levels. If true, it represented not just a family disagreement, but potentially a form of child abuse disguised as royal tradition. Harrison found himself facing a situation that his training had never prepared him for. How do you protect a member of the royal family from other members of the royal family? Charlotte had been listening to this conversation with the intense focus that children often display when adults discuss matters that affect them. "Sergeant Harrison," she said, her voice small but determined, "I don't want to go to a special school far away from Mummy and Daddy. I just want to be a normal girl who happens to be a princess, not a princess who can't be a normal girl." Her words, spoken with the simple wisdom of childhood, crystallized the fundamental issue at stake. Harrison looked at this 7-year-old girl. Yes, she was third in line to the throne. Yes, she had responsibilities and a destiny that most people could never imagine. But right now, in this moment, she was simply a scared child who wanted her parents. "Your Grace," Harrison said to Camilla, regardless of the family dynamics involved, the immediate issue is that Princess Charlotte was removed from school without proper authorization and brought to a restricted area during severe weather conditions. For her safety and well-being, I need to return her to her parents immediately." Camilla's face crumpled, and, for a moment she looked far older than her years. "You don't understand, Sergeant. If you return her now, if you follow standard protocols and report this through normal channels, Charles will know that I intervened. He'll accelerate whatever timeline he has, and Charlotte will disappear into the system before William and Catherine even know what's happening." Harrison felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on his shoulders. His sworn duty was to protect the royal family, but what happened when protecting one member might put another at risk? What happened when the very institution he had devoted his career to serving seemed to be acting against the best interests of a child? The rain continued to pour down around them, creating a cocoon of white noise that isolated this small group from the rest of the world. In this bubble of storm and secrecy, Harrison knew he was being asked to make a choice that would define not only his career but also his conscience. Charlotte looked up at him again, her eyes no longer filled with panic but with a kind of trust that made his chest tighten. "Can you help me?" she asked simply. "Can you make sure I get to stay with Mummy and Daddy?" In that moment, Sergeant Michael Harrison realized that all his years of training, all his protocols and procedures, all his carefully structured understanding of duty and loyalty, came down to this single question from a 7-year-old girl. And, despite the potential consequences for his career, his security clearance, and his future, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes, Princess," he said quietly. "I'm going to help you." But, even as he made this promise, Harrison knew that keeping it would require him to navigate the most dangerous and politically sensitive situation of his entire career. The storm around them was nothing compared to the tempest he was about to unleash within the corridors of royal power. Harrison's promise to Charlotte seemed to release something in Camilla, as if she had been holding her breath for weeks and could finally exhale. She sank against the side of the Range Rover, rain streaming down her face mixing with tears of what appeared to be relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been trying to find a way to warn William and Catherine, but Charles has been monitoring all my communications. Every phone call, every email, every meeting is being watched. When I realized they were planning to move Charlotte this week, I knew I had to act." Harrison helped Charlotte into the front passenger seat of his patrol vehicle, wrapping her in an emergency blanket he kept in the back. The little girl was shivering, though whether from cold or stress, he couldn't tell. As he adjusted the heater and made sure she was comfortable, his mind was already working through the implications of what Camilla had revealed. "Your Grace, I need to understand the timeline here," Harrison said, settling into the driver's seat while Camilla took the seat behind them. "When you say they were planning to move Charlotte this week, what exactly does that mean?" Camilla took a shaky breath before responding. "There's a boarding school in Switzerland, very exclusive, very secure. Officially, it would be presented as an opportunity for Charlotte to receive the finest education available to European royalty. Unofficially, it would remove her from William and Catherine's daily influence during what Charles considers the most formative years of her development." "And her parents weren't consulted about this?" Harrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Charles believes that as the reigning monarch, decisions about the education and upbringing of all royal children fall under his authority, particularly those in direct line of succession. He's been consulting with advisors who share his view that the modern royal family has become too informal, too focused on being relatable rather than maintaining proper royal dignity. Charlotte spoke up from her cocoon of blankets, her voice small but clear. "Grandpa Charles scares me sometimes. He looks at me like I'm not really me, like I'm just a thing that needs to be fixed or made better." The innocence and clarity of her observation cut through all the political complexity of the situation. Harrison realized that regardless of constitutional law or royal precedent, he was dealing with a fundamental issue of child welfare. A 7-year-old should never feel like she was being evaluated as an object rather than loved as a person. "Sergeant," Camilla continued, "there's something else you need to know. The removal from school wasn't supposed to be today. I found out this morning that the timeline had been moved up. Charles received some kind of intelligence report suggesting that William and Catherine were becoming suspicious of the activities around Charlotte. Rather than risk a confrontation, he decided to act immediately." This revelation hit Harrison like a thunderbolt. "You're saying that this removal was supposed to happen with or without your involvement?" "Yes. If I hadn't taken Charlotte from school, someone else would have. At least this way, she's with family, someone who cares about her well-being rather than just following orders." Harrison's radio crackled to life, breaking the tension inside the vehicle. "Unit 7, please report your status. We've had inquiries about your extended stop." Harrison looked at Charlotte, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes, then at Camilla, whose face was a mask of anxiety and hope. In this moment, he had to make a decision that would either protect a child or potentially destroy his career. "Control, this is Unit 7. I've encountered a situation that requires delicate handling. I need to speak directly with Commander Phillips, highest priority, secure channel." There was a pause before the response came back. "Unit 7, stand by. Patching you through to Commander Phillips now." Commander Phillips had been Harrison's superior for 8 years, and, more importantly, he was a man Harrison trusted completely. If anyone could navigate the political landmine he was about to present, it would be Phillips. "Harrison, what's your situation?" Phillips's voice came through clearly despite the storm. "Sir, I need to brief you on a situation involving Princess Charlotte and the Duchess of Cornwall. The circumstances are unusual and require immediate command-level decision-making." There was another pause, longer this time. "Understood. Bring them to Secure Station 3 immediately. I'll meet you there with a full briefing team." Secure Station 3 was a hardened facility within the Windsor complex, designed for situations involving potential threats to royal family members. The fact that Phillips was activating it meant he understood the gravity of what Harrison was reporting, even without the details. As Harrison started his patrol vehicle, he noticed that Charlotte had grown very quiet. When he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw that she was staring out the window with an expression that no child should ever have to wear, the look of someone who understood that the adults around her were making decisions that would fundamentally change her life, and that she had no control over the outcome. "Princess Charlotte," Harrison said gently, "we're going somewhere safe where we can figure out the best way to handle this situation. I want you to know that my job is to protect you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." Charlotte nodded solemnly, then asked the question that broke Harrison's heart, "Will I get to see Mummy and Daddy before I have to go away?" "Charlotte, sweetheart," Camilla said from the back seat, reaching forward to take the little girl's hand, "that's exactly what we're trying to prevent. We're going to make sure you don't have to go away at all." As they drove through the storm toward Secure Station 3, Harrison's mind was racing through the possible outcomes of what they were about to set in motion. By bringing this situation to command attention, he was essentially forcing a confrontation between different factions within the royal family. The consequences could be severe for everyone involved. But every time he looked at Charlotte in his rearview mirror, he knew he was making the right choice. Whatever political storms this might create, whatever damage it might do to his career or his relationships within the royal household, it was worth it to ensure that this little girl would not disappear into an institutional system that valued her title more than her humanity. The radio crackled again as they approached the secure facility. "Unit 7, we have confirmation that Prince William and the Princess of Wales are en route to your location. They've been briefed on the general nature of the situation and have requested immediate access to Princess Charlotte." Harrison felt a surge of relief. Whatever else happened, Charlotte would soon be reunited with her parents. But, even as that tension eased, another one replaced it, the knowledge that this reunion would likely trigger a constitutional crisis that would reverberate throughout the monarchy. Camilla seemed to read his thoughts. "Sergeant, I want you to know that I understand the position I've put you in. When this all comes out, there will be those who claim I manipulated you, used my position to involve you in family politics. I want you to know that's not what happened here." "Your Grace," Harrison replied as he pulled up to the security checkpoint, "I'm a protection officer. My job is to protect members of the royal family from harm. Today, I discovered that Princess Charlotte was in distress and, potentially in danger. Everything I've done has been in service of that protection mandate." Charlotte looked up at him with something approaching a smile for the first time since he'd found her. "Thank you for listening to me," she said simply. "Grown-ups don't always listen to children, even when what we're saying is important." Her words crystallized everything Harrison had been feeling since the moment he'd opened the car door and seen her tears. This wasn't about constitutional law or royal precedent or institutional authority. This was about a little girl who deserved to have her voice heard and her well-being protected. As they approached the entrance to Secure Station 3, Harrison could see other vehicles arriving, official cars that he recognized as belonging to senior members of the royal household staff, and, more importantly, the distinctive vehicle used by the Prince and Princess of Wales. The storm that had been raging outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break inside those secure walls. But, for the first time since this all began, Harrison felt confident that they were moving toward a resolution that would put Charlotte's needs first. Whatever came next, he had kept his promise to a 7-year-old girl, and that was something he could live with, regardless of the consequences. The secure briefing room at Station 3 felt more like a courtroom than a conference facility as the various parties took their positions around the polished oak table. Harrison had never seen so many senior royal household officials in one place outside of major state functions, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Princess Charlotte sat between her parents, William and Catherine, both of whom had arrived within minutes of Harrison's call to command. The relief on their faces when they first saw their daughter safe had been palpable, but that relief had quickly transformed into a cold fury as they learned the circumstances that had brought them all together. Commander Phillips had taken charge of the briefing, his years of experience in managing royal security crises evident in the way he controlled the room's dynamic. Across the table sat representatives from King Charles's private office, including his private secretary Sir Alan Morrison, a man whose reputation for absolute loyalty to the crown was matched only by his skill in managing difficult situations. Let me ensure I understand the situation correctly, William said, his voice carrying the barely controlled anger that Harrison had only heard from him once before, during a security briefing about threats to his children. My daughter was removed from school without my knowledge or consent, by my stepmother, because of concerns about plans to send her to boarding school in Switzerland, also without my knowledge or consent. Sir Alan cleared his throat before responding. Your Royal Highness, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of the educational opportunities that were being explored for Princess Charlotte. These were preliminary discussions about options that might be available when she reaches an appropriate age. She's 7 years old, Catherine interjected, her voice ice-cold in a way that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. What exactly constitutes an appropriate age for removing a child from her family? Charlotte had been unusually quiet throughout the adult conversation, but now she looked up at her father. Daddy, am I going to have to go away to school like Harry Potter? The innocent question, referencing her favorite book series, seemed to cut through all the political posturing in the room. William reached down and lifted his daughter onto his lap, holding her close in a gesture that was both protective and defiant. No, sweetheart, William said firmly, his eyes never leaving Sir Alan's face. You're not going anywhere unless Mommy and I decide it's what's best for you, and we would never make that decision without talking to you about it first. Sir Alan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Your Royal Highness, while I certainly understand your feelings as a father, there are constitutional considerations regarding the education of future monarchs that may supersede purely personal preferences. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Harrison, who had been quietly observing from his position near the door, realized he was witnessing a fundamental challenge to the modern royal family's approach to balancing public duty with private family life. Camilla, who had been silently enduring disapproving looks from the king's representatives, finally spoke up. Sir Alan, perhaps you could explain to everyone here exactly what these constitutional considerations entail, because I was under the impression that Prince William, as Charlotte's father and, as heir to the throne, would have primary authority over his daughter's upbringing. The king, Sir Alan replied carefully, has certain prerogatives regarding the education and development of all members of the royal family, particularly those in direct line of succession. These prerogatives have been recognized and exercised for centuries. Times change, William said flatly. And so do our understanding of what constitutes appropriate treatment of children. I don't care what precedents exist from previous centuries, my daughter will not be treated as a political asset to be managed rather than a child to be loved and nurtured. Commander Phillips, who had been taking detailed notes throughout the exchange, looked up from his files. Sir Alan, I need to address a significant security concern. If Princess Charlotte was indeed scheduled to be relocated to an international facility without the knowledge of her parents or the protection services, this represents a massive security failure. We cannot protect individuals whose movements and locations are not properly coordinated through established channels. This was the argument Harrison had been hoping someone would make. Regardless of the constitutional questions, the security implications of the situation were undeniable. Sir Alan's composure cracked slightly. The security arrangements would have been handled through appropriate channels once the educational placement was finalized. When? Catherine demanded. When exactly were you planning to inform us that our daughter was being sent to Switzerland? When the plane was already in the air? Charlotte looked up at her mother with wide eyes. Mummy, what's Switzerland? Is it far away? Catherine's voice softened immediately as she addressed her daughter. It's very far away, darling. But you don't need to worry about it because you're not going there. Sir Alan made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. Your Royal Highnesses, I understand that this has been handled in a way that has caused distress, but the fundamental issue remains. Princess Charlotte's education and development are matters of national importance. The king has a responsibility to ensure that she receives the preparation necessary for her future role. It was then that Harrison realized someone needed to speak up for Charlotte herself, not as a future queen, but as a child whose voice deserved to be heard. Sir, Harrison said, stepping forward from his position near the door. With respect, I've spent the afternoon with Princess Charlotte, and I think it's important that everyone in this room understands her perspective on these plans. All eyes turned to him, and Harrison felt the weight of speaking truth to power in a way he had never experienced before. But, when he looked at Charlotte, still sitting on her father's lap, he found the courage to continue. Princess Charlotte is an intelligent, articulate 7-year-old who understands more about this situation than anyone has given her credit for. She expressed to me, clearly and repeatedly, that she wants to remain with her parents. She's frightened by the prospect of being sent away, and she feels like she's being treated as an object rather than a person. The room fell silent. Harrison could feel the disapproval radiating from Sir Alan and the other representatives of the King's office, but he also saw something else: nods of agreement from Commander Phillips and, more importantly, from William and Catherine. Charlotte wiggled slightly in her father's arms, then looked directly at Sir Alan. "I know I'm going to be queen someday," she said, her 7-year-old voice carrying a dignity that seemed far beyond her years. "But right now I'm just Charlotte, and I want to stay with my family. Can't I learn to be queen from Daddy and Grandmama and still live at home like other children?" Her question hung in the air like a challenge to centuries of royal tradition. In that moment, Harrison realized that this little girl had articulated something profound about the possibility of modernizing the monarchy while still maintaining its essential dignity and purpose. Sir Alan looked around the room, clearly calculating the political implications of various responses. Finally, he spoke. "Your Royal Highness," he said, addressing Charlotte directly, "your feelings are certainly important, and I'm sure arrangements can be made to ensure your comfort while still providing you with the excellent education that your position requires." It was a politician's answer, designed to sound accommodating while committing to nothing. But William was having none of it. "Let me be absolutely clear," William said, standing up with Charlotte still in his arms. "My daughter will receive an excellent education, and she will be prepared for her future responsibilities. But those decisions will be made by Catherine and me, in consultation with Charlotte herself as she grows older. Any future educational opportunities will be evaluated based on what's best for Charlotte as our daughter, not what's most convenient for managing royal traditions." Commander Phillips closed his notebook and looked around the room. "From a security standpoint, I need clear protocols moving forward. All movements and activities involving Princess Charlotte must be coordinated through proper channels. No exceptions, regardless of who was making the request." As the meeting began to wind down, Harrison realized that while this confrontation might have resolved the immediate crisis, it had also exposed fundamental tensions within the royal family that would likely continue to surface in various forms as Charlotte grew older. But, for now, at least, she was safe with her parents, and her voice had been heard. Sometimes, Harrison reflected, protecting the royal family meant protecting them from each other, and, today, he had done exactly that. 3 weeks after the confrontation at Secure Station 3, the Windsor estate felt different to Sergeant Michael Harrison. The autumn air had a crispness that seemed to carry whispers of change, and the way senior staff moved through the corridors suggested that significant adjustments were being made to how things operated within the royal household. Harrison was completing his morning patrol when his radio buzzed with a message that would have seemed impossible just a month earlier. "Unit 7, please report to the Prince of Wales's private office at your earliest convenience. Priority meeting requested." As he made his way through the familiar corridors, Harrison reflected on how much had changed since that stormy afternoon when he had pulled over a black Range Rover. The immediate crisis had been resolved, Charlotte was safe with her parents, and no unauthorized removals had been attempted. But the deeper implications of what had been revealed continued to ripple through the royal household like stones thrown into a still pond. The door to William's private office opened before Harrison could knock. William himself stood there, looking more relaxed than Harrison had seen him in months, but also more determined, as if he had made fundamental decisions about how he intended to manage his family's future. "Sergeant Harrison, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. We have some important matters to discuss." Harrison took the offered seat, noting that they were alone in the office. This was unusual. Senior royals typically conducted meetings with staff in the presence of private secretaries or other officials. The informal setting suggested that William wanted to have a conversation rather than deliver official instructions. "I wanted to speak with you personally about what happened 3 weeks ago," William began, settling into the chair across from Harrison rather than behind his desk. "Your actions that day potentially saved my daughter from a traumatic experience, and, more importantly, you ensured that her voice was heard during a situation where she had no other advocates." Harrison felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. In the weeks since the incident, he had wondered whether his decision to involve himself so directly in royal family dynamics would ultimately damage his career, regardless of the good intentions behind his actions. "Your Royal Highness, I was simply doing my job," Harrison replied. "My primary responsibility is the safety and well-being of the royal family, and Princess Charlotte was clearly in distress." William smiled, but it was a serious smile that carried more weight than humor. "Yes, you were doing your job, but you were doing it in a way that required significant personal courage. You chose to prioritize a child's well-being over institutional politics, and that's exactly the kind of judgment we need from the people we trust to protect our family." The prince stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where Charlotte could be seen playing with her brothers, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "Michael, may I call you Michael? The events of that day have forced Catherine and me to re-evaluate how we approach Charlotte's security and education. We've realized that protecting her from external threats isn't enough if we don't also protect her from internal pressures that could damage her development as both a future queen and a happy, healthy child." Harrison felt a shift in the conversation's tone, as if William was moving from gratitude towards something more concrete. "We've been authorized to create a new position within the Royal Protection Services," William continued, turning back to face Harrison. "A specialized role focused specifically on Charlotte's security and well-being as she grows up. This position would involve not just physical protection, but also serving as an advocate for her interests when adult decisions are being made that affect her life." The implications of what William was describing began to sink in. This wasn't just a security position, it was a role that would require someone to navigate the complex intersection of royal duty, family dynamics, and child welfare on an ongoing basis. "Your Royal Highness, are you offering me this position?" "I am. But I want you to understand what it would entail. You would be Charlotte's primary protection officer, but you would also be empowered to raise concerns about any plans or decisions that you believe might not be in her best interests. You would attend educational planning meetings, family conferences about her development, and you would have direct access to Catherine and me whenever you feel Charlotte's voice needs to be represented." Harrison was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. In essence, William was proposing to institutionalize the kind of advocacy that had emerged spontaneously during the crisis 3 weeks ago. "This is unprecedented, isn't it?" Harrison asked. "Completely," William acknowledged. "But, then, again, Charlotte's situation is unprecedented. She's going to grow up in the most scrutinized royal environment in history, with pressures and expectations that no previous generation of royals has had to manage. We believe she deserves someone whose primary loyalty is to her well-being rather than to institutional traditions." Through the window, Harrison could see Charlotte organizing some kind of elaborate game with her brothers, her natural leadership abilities evident even in play. She had recovered from the trauma of that afternoon remarkably well, but Harrison knew that the fundamental issues that had created the crisis hadn't disappeared, they had simply been postponed. "What about the King's office?" Harrison asked. "How do they feel about this new arrangement?" William's expression grew more serious. "There have been extensive discussions. The king understands that the modern monarchy requires different approaches to raising future monarchs. There's been agreement that Charlotte's development should prioritize her psychological health and family stability, while still preparing her for her eventual responsibilities." It was a diplomatic way of saying that a power struggle had taken place, and William had won. The constitutional crisis that Harrison had feared during that stormy afternoon had indeed occurred, but it had been resolved in favor of the principle that had guided his actions, that Charlotte's well-being should come first. "Sir," Harrison said, "if I accept this position, I need to know that I'll have your support when difficult decisions need to be made. The situation 3 weeks ago won't be the last time that institutional pressures and Charlotte's personal needs come into conflict." "You have my word," William replied immediately. "And Catherine's. We've learned that protecting our children requires us to be willing to challenge tradition when tradition conflicts with their well-being. You showed us that such challenges can be made respectfully but firmly, and that's exactly the approach we want to take moving forward." Harrison looked out the window again, watching Charlotte with her brothers. In that moment, he realized that accepting this position wouldn't just be about protecting one child, it would be about helping to shape how the monarchy evolved to meet the needs of future generations. "Your Royal Highness," Harrison said, "I would be honored to accept this position." William extended his hand, and, as they shook, Harrison felt the weight of a new kind of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about physical protection anymore, it was about ensuring that a little girl who would someday be queen would have the chance to be a child first. "There's one more thing," William said as their handshake ended. "Charlotte specifically requested that you be the one to take on this role. She said, and, I quote, Sergeant Harrison listens to me like grown-ups should listen to children. Coming from a 7-year-old, I think that's the highest possible recommendation for someone tasked with protecting her future." As Harrison left the meeting, he realized that the storm that had brought them all together that afternoon had ultimately cleared the way for something unprecedented in the history of the British monarchy, a formal recognition that even future queens deserved to have their voices heard and their childhood protected. Walking back through the corridors of Windsor Castle, Harrison could hear Charlotte's laughter echoing from the gardens, and he smiled, knowing that his job for the foreseeable future would be to ensure that sound never disappeared from the halls of the British royal family. The little girl who had cried in the back seat of a Range Rover during a storm had not only found her voice, she had changed the very institution she would someday lead. And Sergeant Michael Harrison would be there to make sure she never had to face such challenges alone again.